Well, this is my final infographic for Info 362. This has been such a great quarter, probably one of my favorite classes I've ever taken at UW. So let's get started with this final video. So first I'll talk about the 5 forms of visual potential on my infographic. As you can see, my final infographic is about the evolution of dating. So the first form of visual potential I exploited was appearance. As you can see in the title of my infographic, I placed my appearance element. This was one of my silhouettes that I created from an earlier image. It was originally a photograph, but instead of using a grayscale, I wanted to make it somewhat of an icon. I chose this element because I thought it made it clear to the audience what I was trying to depict. It is obviously a couple who look interested in each other, which could hint at an infograph being about relationships of some sort. I believe this exploits the visual potential of appearance because the audience can glance at this element and make a good guess as to what my infographic is about. So, behind the evolution of dating title is my appearance element. As you can see, it's the light pink couple in the background there. So the second form of visual potential I exploited was location. I think I exploited this form of visual potential really well and very simply. I chose a map of the United States for a few reasons. The data I wanted to display was about what words are most commonly used in online dating profiles by state. So an easy solution to display this was on a map of the United States. Doing this made it extremely easy for the audience to recognize this element has something to do with location or with the United States. Especially having lines and icons connecting to each state made it obvious that there was something associated with each state. So you can't really see it right now, I need to zoom in a little bit, but I had each line and icon connect to the state in which I was talking about or referring to. And then I added the data within the circles connecting to each state. So I think people, glancing at this element could get a general idea that it has something to do with the United States. And then once they look a little more into the data, can obviously see what I'm trying to depict. The next form of visual potential that I tried to exploit in my infographic was numbers. I somewhat struggled with this element because it was difficult to find data that was fitting with my topic. When I did find the data I wanted to display, which was what percentage of different age groups have asked someone out on a first date via text, I had to decide how to make it clear to understand. First, I emulated a bar graph because they are easily recognizable, but used heart icons to represent the amount of each icon, as you can see right here. I thought this exploited numbers well because it was easy to visually compare each category and be able to tell if one is more than the other by just glancing at the element. So as you can see here, this bar is obviously higher than this bar over here, which makes the user think and understand that this is more of whatever I'm talking about than this one. My hope was that by seeing the shape and style of a bar graph, as well as the use of heart icons, that the audience would be able to recognize that I'm showing some form of numerical data about love or relationships. Another form of visual potential that I tried to exploit was relationships, which is up here in this corner. The element was a little challenging, mainly because of the topic I chose, but also because it was difficult finding a relationship I wanted to display. I finally decided I wanted to display the different steps or stages throughout dating, and did so in a somewhat flowchart kind of way. All of my critiques on this element, so it was very easy to recognize that this element was a sort of process, as you can see, as well as a lot of visual interest to my infographic. I tried to exploit the visual potential of relationships by adding decision points along the way, as you can see here, to show that each decision played a role in the outcome of the process. Therefore, with each step or decision, there's a relationship with the outcome. So you begin here and follow the path of the process and then make each choice, and each choice would determine whether or not you continue on to the next step of the relationship. So I thought it was a really good element of interactivity with the user or with the audience because they can look at it and make decisions for themselves and learn that way of through this process. The last form of visual potential I exploited was time, which is this element over here. I knew I wanted to create a timeline of sorts, one because it would show interesting data, and two because it would be easily understood by the audience. I took a unique twist on a normal timeline and made mine in the shape of a heart to depict love and relationships like my topic, and also added an arrow to the end of it to help show the audience there was a start and an ending. So here's the start, and then here's the ending. At first I did not include an arrow, and the audience was confused as to how it was a timeline. But once I added the arrow and indication of start and finish, everyone could see how I exploited the visual potential of time. I also added in these icons along the way to sort of depict the different points in time of when things changed. So these are basically the points along my timeline, including icons to explain a little bit about the topic without having to read my annotations about the timeline through dating. So you would read this timeline and then stop at each point and see that is when an important event or information took place. The next topic I'm going to cover are encodings. So for my time element in my infographic, a lot of my elements used various encodings to get information across to the users. Although it was not super apparent, I somewhat used position as an encoding for my time element, which are these elements here. The icons in times that are closest to the arrow suggest it is more recent in time, and the farther away the icons are from the arrow suggests it was a longer time ago. I possibly could have used location as an encoding in a different way if I had a different layout for the timeline, such as vertical or horizontal, but I liked how I chose to use this encoding in a timeline in the shape of a heart because it does represent relationships and dating. So this encoding, obviously, the heart shape was meant to show the audience that it's obviously an element about love or relationships. And then the arrow is also to show that it's somewhat of a continuous or ongoing timeline without them having to read too much into my element if they did not want to. So the next element I'm going to talk about encodings is my relationship element, which is this one in this corner. In my relationship element, I somewhat use color as an encoding. For example, what stands out the most is how I used a black rectangle to represent each step in the dating process. When the audience looks at this element, they can easily see that the black rectangles represent something important. I also use size as an encoding because the most important aspects of this element were each step in the process of dating. I used a rectangle much larger than any part of this element to emphasize its importance. So these compared to these are obviously a lot bigger. With the use of these two encodings, it was apparent which parts of the element should receive the most attention. Although I could have employed other encodings, such as position, color, and size, were the most fitting for this type of element. So basically, I could have used position as a different encoding, but I thought color and size were the best way to get these concepts across. In terms of my appearance element, which is this one again, there was no encoding really used. The color does not really represent anything besides for it to stand out against the title, and same with its position. It's centered because it looks best. I do not really see how I could have used another encoding for the appearance element since it is not displaying any data. It is just trying to give the audience a general idea as to what this infographic is about. So I would say overall I didn't tend to use any encoding for this element. For my numbers element, the main encoding I used is height. So I'll scroll down to here. Since I'm representing percentages, I used height as an encoding because it makes it very clear which data point is larger than another. So the higher the bar and filled in hearts, the larger the percentage. I could have used other encodings such as size or color, but I wanted to keep it visually consistent. With choosing height as an encoding, it was easy to emulate a bar graph, which was my goal for this numbers element. Using height kept it really simple, and emulating a bar graph made it easy for the audience to recognize that I was depicting some sort of numerical data. For my location element, not much encoding is used to signify anything extremely important. Color is somewhat used as an encoding to represent the data points. However, no one data point is more important than another. Position could somewhat be considered as an encoding in this element because it helps display how distance affects the data being shown. However, again, no one position is more important than another. For this element, it didn't really make sense to use any distinct encoding because it was not needed. So obviously, the distance from each other shows the location and shows, once you look at the data, how it differs from each other, but encoding doesn't make a huge difference in this element, that I would say. The color definitely makes it stand out. It makes it seem like a important element for a person to look at, but other than that, yeah, encodings weren't largely used in this element. So the next topic I'm going to cover is color. In terms of color, I think I emulated my color model very well. It seems as if my color harmony uses somewhat of a monochromatic color scheme, because it uses neutrals like beige and black, as well as multiple hues of different pinks. For highlighting, I often use a hot pink color to highlight areas in which I want attention to be drawn, such as my location and numbers element. It causes the audience to really focus on the data that is being displayed because I try to emphasize those data points with the hot pink color. Like I mentioned earlier, I use black to encode important text points, such as in my relationship element, which is up here. As well as icons I wanted users to pay attention to, such as in my time element. So black is used here and here to make it seem important. Aside from those examples, no single color meant one thing in my infographic. I definitely use color to trigger associations in some examples in my infographic. I use pink hearts often, and because of the shape and color, it was supposed to emphasize the topic of my infographic, and that it has to do with love, dating, and relationships. Finally, I really think my color scheme set the tone. Initially, I used a teal blue and coral red as my main colors, and it kept setting the wrong tone, so I decided to change it. With my new color scheme, it gives off a somewhat feminine tone because of the pink, often used in infographics about dating. Because pink is a heavily used color in my infographic, I think it sets a playful tone that plays into relationships and dating. One thing I noticed is when I did change my color scheme in my color model, it definitely changed my entire infographic drastically. I couldn't get the thought out of my mind of my initial color model, which was the teal and red, that it looked somewhat aquatic or a little too masculine for the topic, which is somewhat of a generalization, but I wanted to, adding the different layers of pinks makes it a little more easy to assume what my topic is about. Something like dating and love, where pink is often a common color associated with that topic. So next topic I'm going to cover is font. The font style I decided to choose for my infographic was a body empty condensed light. Let's see if we can click on this a little bit here. So yeah, as you can see up here, that is the font I use throughout. I chose this font because I like the clean, condensed, and modern feel that the text had. However, I did stray a little bit from my text model. In the title of my text model, they emphasized one of the words by using a large cursive style font. To keep my infographic condensed, all caps font, to keep my infographic consistent, I did not include that element in my title. I stuck with using the same condensed all caps font that they used in their title and all throughout the infographic. For all of my titles, I used all caps, as you can see here and throughout. And for the smaller text and less important text elements, I used lowercase. In terms of labels, I used both identity and precision labels to help convey the data and information in my infographic. I used identity labels in my relationship element and location element, as you can see here and here. The identity labels in my relationship element were each step of the dating process, which were placed on each black rectangle. In my location element, I used identity labels to label each state, and in my numbers element, I used identity labels to label each group, as you can see down here. I used precision labels in my numbers element to label the percentages, such as up here. And I guess you could consider the values on my location element, which are the words, as well as precision labels. This text added context to my elements. In my infographic, I also used annotations, such as in my relationship and time element. This text added context to my elements and what I was trying to convey in them. For association strategies, I used both proximity and linear lines. In my numbers element, I used proximity for my data labels, such as up here. They're close to the numerical representations. And then in my numbers element, I use proximity for my data labels, and in my time element and location element, I use leader lines, such as here and here. Leader lines to connect labels with my data. Overall, the font was a difficult topic to cover, and it carries a lot of importance in an infographic that you wouldn't normally think it does. So I actually spent a lot of time trying to pick my font and what I wanted it to be. I could have emulated my font model a little better with adding in those cursive elements, but because my visual language model is somewhat complicated, I didn't want to make it too much going on. So I decided to keep the font consistent while everything else was a little bit crazy and busy. but that was the way my visual language model was, so that's okay if it's a little crazy busy. So the next topic I'm going to talk about is visual hierarchy. My infographic is very interesting in terms of visual hierarchy. I would say that unless you look at each individual element, there is not much visual hierarchy. As a whole, it is balanced. I think this visual balance is achieved because the infographic is divided into 4 equal quadrants, and the elements are restricted to each quadrant. However, if you were to look at each quadrant individually, you can see that some visual hierarchy does exist. For example, in the numbers element, the phone and data inside the phone is the most pronounced element, and the text surrounding it is secondary and has less visual importance than the main element. I think because my topic is so complex, having a balanced visual hierarchy allows the user to peruse the infographic as they please, so they are not forced to look at one element before the other. Each element is so unique and conveys its own message that it does not necessarily matter where the user begins reading the infographic. So my goal was for a user to look at my infographic and basically go wherever their eyes led them. There's not one huge central element, that draws their attention, but in each quadrant there is definitely a central element. So the one in this top left would be the big heart. I would say the one in the top right would be the heart, which is the title and the starting point. In the bottom left, I would say it's the entire thing. It's pretty spread out and dispersed evenly. And then obviously in the bottom right is this main phone element showing my numerical data. So next topic I'm gonna cover is unity and variety. The next topic is unity and variety. One way I create unity in my infographic is repetition of circles. I use circles in every element I've created, so that way the use of the shape is consistent throughout. Another way I create unity is through the use of the shape of a heart, which again is used in every element in my infographic. I do this to consistently convey that my infographic is about love and relationships. Another way I created unity was through the use of color. I use hot pink for important elements, such as here, here, and up there. For important elements and used it consistently throughout. However, I did not want it to be overpowering. I also created unity by having all of my text be black. On the flip side, one way I created variety was through the use of color. I used both hot pink and black for the fill of my icons, as well as had some shapes filled in and others not, such as here and then here. I did not use texture because it did not emulate my visual language model, but tried using outline shapes and colors as best as possible to emulate my visual language model. One way I strayed away from my visual language model was firstly not having every main element be in a circle, and that was due to size. So these are in circles because they would fit, but these would not because it would have been too difficult for them to fit in a circle. My content would not be able to fit in the circles and look balanced, so I only had 2 elements in a circle, the top left and bottom right. I also did not fill in those circles with a solid color like my visual language model, but again, this was a personal choice because I thought the visual balance would be off if they were filled in. One way I emulate my visual language model was by having it be very busy, yet organized with content. I filled in the empty spaces with content and always made sure the audience had something to look at. So, in my visual language model, these 2 would be filled in with a solid pink. However, because these don't have any circles, I thought it would be a little offsetting and off-putting, and so I did just emulate the outlines. And then these, I did not have a circle surrounding them. But I think it looks better that way, and I definitely played around with it, but I think this was the most visually pleasing version of what I could have done. So the next topic I'm going to cover is layout. For the most part, I think my layout emulated my visual language model really well. I emulated it by dividing it up into 4 equal quadrants, as well as putting a lot of my content into circles, like my visual language model. However, 2 of my quadrants did not have a circle around the content because if it did, it would be way too cramped, and I'm referring to these 2 over here. I also emulated my layout model by putting the title in the middle and having a similar shape for the title. However, I put my appearance element there when my visual language model did not have that. So this in the background was originally not in my visual language model. Although that strayed away from emulating my visual language model, I thought it looked best. I had no specific grouping or division for the quadrants and the content in them because my topic is so complex and because there was no visual hierarchy. It did not really matter where the elements were placed. Overall, I think I emulated my layout model really well, and most of the differences were because the content was difficult to place and make fit. So one thing I talked to Marilyn a lot about and that I was concerned about was my appearance element, which was this. I ended up placing it in my title element because I think one is in the title, which is where the eye mostly looks first. And second of all, it was an all-encompassing element, and so it didn't really belong in any quadrant. It wasn't specific to any one element that I was trying to show. So putting it there basically was a good summary of my infographic, and if someone looked there initially, they could get an idea along with the title as to what my infographic was about. So the next topic I'm going to cover is alignment, and this is the final topic. Because of the way my infographic is laid out, I did not have to use alignment too much to signify grouping. However, one place I did use alignment in my infographic was in my time element. Because I had a ton of annotations, which are these I'm referring to, I needed a way to group them to make the audience recognize which text annotation belonged to each data point, or each icon. I did this by aligning them all so they did not get clumped together and confuse the reader. So I aligned all of these to make sure you could tell which data point they belonged to. Another place where I used alignment was in my numbers element. The surrounding text inside of the circle is a grouping, so I right align and left align them, these ones, to show the reader that they are grouped together and relevant to each other. Overall, I made sure all of my elements were spaced and aligned accordingly to promote coherence and visual aesthetic, making sure my infographic is organized and tight. So, as you can see here, I made these two columns of text face each other and have opposite alignment to make it seem like it was surrounding this main element, and so that once you read this column, you would then go to this column. So hopefully that worked in the benefit of the reader to know to read both columns since they were both related to this main element. So overall, this was one of my favorite classes I've taken here at UW, and I learned a lot about Adobe Creative Studio that I really don't think I would have learned outside of taking this class. Thank you for the great class, Marilyn and Chris, and all of the hard work definitely made me proud of my final product. I will definitely be saving this and possibly using it as a portfolio piece. So thank you guys, had a really great quarter, and you guys were really great.